Good morning, everyone. Come in and take a seat, please, so we can get started. Hi, welcome to Pasadena. Thank you for being here. So, good morning and welcome to our annual conference. I'm Claire Burkamp, the CEO of Textile Exchange, and it is incredibly inspiring to see everyone in this room. I can see that we have a room filled with dedicated people working to shape the future of this industry. This year's theme, The Case for Change, is not only timely, it's essential. We're here to explore how embedding climate and nature best practices directly into operations can lead to lasting, resilient, and genuine transformation. Today, we have change makers from all around the world coming here to join forces. We all have a role to play so that we can have a true impact on the change that we want to see. We're really honored to have all of you here. It truly feels like an honor to convene this group of incredible people. And I know that we have come together during these next few days to have the hard conversations, to dive into the trippy topics. We are not afraid here, and neither should you, to air the elephants in the room, to tackle the hard things, because it's only in doing that that we can really come to true resolution and true solutions. We've designed a very exciting program for you, and I hope that it delivers the insights and inspirations that brought you here. Before we dive in, I want to say thank you and extend gratitude to our title sponsor, AmBroCycle. Thank you for your dedication to circularity and sustainable innovation. Also, a huge thank you to all of our sponsors. Your support is essential in creating this platform for learning and engagement. And of course, thank you to the Textile Exchange team. Really, it is your dedication in bringing this event to life and moving our mission forward every day that makes this all possible. And I'd also like to thank our board, who has provided incredible guidance and support over the past couple of years and has been instrumental in helping us steer towards greater impact and purpose as an organization. For those newer to Textile Exchange, our work is centered in helping to drive beneficial outcome for climate and nature across the fashion, textile, and apparel industry. In the past year, we took time to get more clarity, to really look at what it is that we're trying to achieve, so that every step we take can be as impactful as possible. We're really looking now to how we can create opportunities for more collective action, how we can really think about where and what needs financing. And later today, we're going to be launching our updated standard, the Materials Matter standard, and I hope that you join us for that as well. In this room, we have farmers, growers, producers, recyclers, brands, consultants, nonprofit, and so many others. The diversity in this community is our strength, and I really encourage you to get to know someone you don't already know, to reach outside of your usual function or community so that you can continue to really expand this collective opportunity that we have, because it really is only in working together and getting to know, maybe someone you don't know, maybe you get to meet a producer from a country you've never been to, that you can truly understand the multifaceted nature of this work and what we're trying to achieve together. Over the next few days, we will be diving into strategies that can really help us look at all of this. We'll be hearing from both seasoned sustainability leaders and new voices alike, really thinking about how we can truly try and tackle what we're trying to tackle here. For those of you joining us online as well, thank you. We're thrilled to provide an interactive virtual platform so that everyone can be a part of this. So again, thank you to all of you for being a part of this, for coming here, for taking the time to travel. For many of you, I know this has been a large distance that you took to get here. So we hope that this is the moment where we can really come together so that we can leave with a renewed focus and actionable insights that fuel the future of our industry. So now I'm going to pass over, and I'm thrilled to introduce this year's host, award-winning climate and environmental journalist Whitney Bach. She's bringing unparalleled insights to this year's event. She's going to be here to guide us through the next couple of days, and then passing over to our first panel. So thank you for being here, and please join me welcoming Whitney on stage.
Good morning, everyone. How are we doing? Are we awake yet? Yeah, okay. I'm so thrilled to see you all here in Pasadena this year. I know many of you have been to Textile Exchange many times and are return visitors, and I'm sure we also have some new folks in the audience as well. And either way, we're so glad you're here, enjoying this beautiful venue and beautiful Pasadena. I've heard that this venue was where The Voice is filmed sometimes, so just know that you're in the presence of greatness, even if you aren't seeing it right in front of you. I am Whitney Bauk, as Claire mentioned, and I am a climate journalist. I've had sort of a long journey in journalism, and what I do today is cover climate and the environment in a few different ways. I do a lot of agriculture and food systems reporting for The Guardian, and I'm also the print editor of a magazine called Atmos, which is sort of at the intersection of climate and culture, and which you can see in the exhibition hall over there if you want to take a look. But I've also written for the New York Times, the Washington Post, the Guardian, Financial Times, and a lot of others. And before that, I was the sustainability editor at a news site called Fashionista, where I really built out the sustainability beat. So I've spent a lot of my career looking at this industry in particular, and then also looking at other industries and sort of trying to understand and help readers understand how we fit into the climate and environment story. And I love getting to be part of Textile Exchange because I think it's kind of doing the same thing, of trying to help us understand some of these bigger issues and how we fit into them, and how you in this audience can be a part of being the change in that way. As Claire mentioned, the sort of overall aim and objective of this week is to think about making the case for change. I think there is a very obvious sort of moral case for change from my perspective, in which is that we live on this planet, and if we want to have a future on this planet, we have to get in line with planetary boundaries. And we're not doing that yet. We are not living within that, and we are not making fast enough progress. But it's easy to say that, and obviously a lot harder to put that into practice. If it were easy to suddenly be doing right by the planet and by all the communities in our supply chains, everyone would have done it already. So I think some of what we're hoping to dig into this week is really looking at what it takes to build the kinds of resilient supply chains that can be ready for the future of this climate moment that we're living in, and can be treating landscapes and people and animals and water and soil all well on the process. We have a really great panel planned for this morning, but before we dig into that, I want to get into a few of the logistics just to help you make the most of the 3 days that you're here, 3 or 4 days that you're here. The first is that if you haven't already gotten onto the mobile app or the Wi-Fi, that information is on the back of your name tags. So there's a lot of information on the back of that will help you sort of orient yourself. And if you want to touch base with any Textile Exchange, of this Textile Exchange team in person, you can find them at the Hub Live, which is in the exhibition hall. There's also lots to see in there, so definitely recommend going and checking that out. The mobile app is the best way to sort of get oriented. There's maps, there's ways to connect with other people at the conference, there's sort of the agenda, and if you're a competitive person, there's even like a gamified aspect this year, so the more you interact, the more points you can win, and then you can maybe win a ticket, 2 tickets, a few tickets for next year. I don't know all the details, but get in there, it seems good. And the last thing that we're going to note is, we're just getting started this morning, but really hoping to start on time as much as possible, because you all are here in person, which is amazing, but we also have people joining us virtually, and we want to be able to start on time, in part out of recognition for that. And so without further ado, I'll turn it over to the plenary speakers. This session is going to be looking at resilience and responsibility in a changing climate, and the leaders that we're going to be bringing on stage are going to be talking about how businesses and communities can turn challenges into opportunities by reducing waste and working collaboratively. So we're going to talk about legislation and what it might take to sort of get to the future we want to see. So without further ado, I'll invite Sarah Kent of Business of Fashion, Matt Dwyer of Patagonia, and Liz Ricketts of the Orr Foundation onto stage.
Thank you, Whitney, and thank you all for being here, and thank you, Matt and Liz. I think this is such a great conversation to start off with when we think about the case for change. Both of you have been working on the challenges in the industry for many years now, and I think can talk in painful detail about the challenges in moving the needle, but also where we've made progress and what might change the situation we're in today and move things forward from where we are right now. And I wanted to start with you, Liz, because the All Foundation, which you co-founded and are executive director of, works in Ghana in one of the world's largest secondhand clothing markets. And you've done a huge amount of work to really raise awareness of the impact of this industry that we're all connected to. And so I wanted to start by asking you to paint a picture for us a little bit as to what it is you're seeing on the ground and how things have changed even since you started looking at this.
Thank you, Sarah. Hi, everyone. Good morning. So for those who aren't familiar, the OR Foundation, we're a nonprofit that's based in Ghana. We work with Continental Market, which is the largest secondhand clothing market in the world. But I think first, before describing the situation and what we're experiencing there, it's important to also set the context of where the crisis starts, which is here in the global north and in the United States. So we know that the industry is overproducing. We produce more than we can consume. We consume more than we can use, and we have waste as a result of that. We don't know how many garments are being produced every year. The numbers are between 80 billion and 150 billion, which is a pretty embarrassing data gap on production volumes, but we know that it's too much. And ultimately, there needs to be an outlet for that product, and that outlet has become either the landfill and incinerator or the global secondhand trade. So if you're not too familiar, basically when you donate clothes or you put them in a take-back bin in a retail environment or you fill up one of those clean-out kits, only about 10 to 20% of that clothing will be deemed resellable in the local context. The rest of it will enter the global secondhand trade as part of the rag trade and will be exported to places like Ghana. When it gets to Ghana, it's not free. I think there's a lot of misconceptions that the clothing is charity and that it's passed around for free, but it's quite expensive. So retailers in Ghana buy these items for around $200 a piece for one bale that weighs 55 kilograms. And when a retailer, when she purchases these bales, she doesn't have any idea really what's inside. She only knows 2 bits of information. So 1 is the country of export, and 2 is the type of garment inside of that bale. And so when she carries it back to her stall and she opens it on Wednesdays and Saturdays, which are market days, she's gonna immediately start assessing what is it that she can sell. So she opens the bale and she'll start sorting it into 4 piles: first selection, second, third, and fourth. And first selection are the things that are like new. Those are the things that she can immediately merchandise. And that makes up less than 20% of the average bale. But one of the other changes that has happened over the last 10 years is that the value of first selection has depreciated. So if you go into the market, you talk to retailers, they'll tell you that first selection today was third selection 10 years ago, meaning that there's less of the high quality items and she can sell them for less. So basically what's happened over the last 10 years is that whereas previously retailers would achieve a profit off of selling just the first selection alone and then use that money to reinvest in rehabilitating the lower quality items, she no longer has that profit to reinvest in rehabilitating the lower quality items. And this is a business, again, so she has business expenses every single day: transportation, waste management, rent. And at some point, her cost of doing business, her cost of operations is higher than the value of the product that's sitting in her stall. So she has to let it go as waste. So what we found is Consumanto receives around 15 million items a week, and about 40% of the average bale will go unsold and will leave the market as waste. That's a tremendous amount of clothing. In Accra, we don't have a sanitary landfill. We don't have an incinerator. There's nowhere to hide the clothes. And so the waste hits the environment. So what this means is that it's burnt out in the open. It goes to little burn piles around the market or to informal dump sites where it's lit on fire, or some of it will be swept into the open gutter where it will enter the sea. And so when we began our work in 2011, and I first came to Ghana, there was no textile waste on Accra's coastline. But fast forward to today, and there's piles of textile waste taller than I am. So this is the extent of the harm that has been caused by the acceleration of production and the acceleration of this fast fashion business model. And the impact of this is health. It increases the risk of cholera and malaria when you have this level of waste. turtles can no longer lay their eggs on a crow's beaches because they can't dig through the tentacles and the waste. Fishermen no longer have fish to fish, and when they're out, sometimes their nets get caught on these clothing tentacles, which pulls down the net and sometimes causes them to capsize. There is also the impact on human beings. So retailers are no longer making a profit, and a lot of them are going into debt, which means that a lot of the retailers who are working in this market, who are single mothers, don't have the ability to put food on the table, to put their kids into school. And ultimately, cheap commodities require cheap labor. So the people in the market who carry the burden of this broken business model are women called kayeye. And these are female head porters. So in Ghana, it's common to carry things on your head, but it's only healthy to do that to a certain threshold of weight. So in Kantamanto, these young women, sometimes as young as 6, usually 14 to 35, they're head carrying these bales, 55 kilograms. It's their entire body weight or more. And so this amount of weight can literally be crushing. It will impact their spinal column, and it can be fatal. Sometimes they experience internal decapitation, meaning that their necks break under the weight of these bales. Sometimes they're carrying their kids on their back while they're carrying these bales, and the bales will fall backwards and crush their babies to death. So this is a form of labor that should not be necessary, but it is because everyone is being squeezed along this value chain because we are not making clothing with enough embedded value in them. If you think about it this way, if a consumer in America doesn't think that their clothing is worth repairing a button on, then how is that garment going to subsidize the collection, the sorting, the resale, the collection again, the sorting, the repair, the cleaning, the collection again, the sorting, the repair, the resale, the upcycling, and then maybe the recycling? We are trying to build an entire new circular economy or an entire new second half of a value chain with clothing that is cheaper than a cup of coffee. And it's just not going to work. And ultimately, it's communities like Kantamanto that face the impact and carry the burden of that.
I think that makes a very clear case for change and why we need to make change. And Matt, I'm keen to get your perspective because you sit very much on the other side of this. Probably in a, I don't want to say your job is easy, but in a simpler place than many people perhaps in this room, in that you work in a company that gets this and has as its stated aim that it's in business to save the planet. So you have a lot of, you've been empowered to try and find solutions, and yet Patagonia still faces many, many challenges. How do you look at this?
It's not easy, that's right. And I hope everybody's starting this Tuesday morning entirely sobered. Thank you, Liz. Because the reality of what's going on in the planet on behalf of us, an apparel company, and everybody in between is truly sobering. So that was a great way to start. I'd also just like to thank everybody for showing up. This is such an amazing group, whether here or virtually, and to commit this much of your time, out of your day, out of your job to be here and talk about preferred fibers and all the challenges around adoption and acceleration is amazing. So I'm coming to you a bit humbled. I think, Sarah, your prompt is exactly right in that we are in business to save our home planet, and that's a really hard thing to do. And I'll just kind of take a step back to 20 some odd years ago when Patagonia launched the first recycled polyester fleece. And it was Sprite bottle green because they couldn't get the coloration out of the pop bottles. If you left it out in the sun for too long, it probably turned to dust. But it was a really great place to start as far as proving that you can add value to waste and turn it into a more durable good. We have a habit of doing things like that and then taking our sweet time to follow up. So when I came to Patagonia nearly 11 years ago, I was leading the materials development team. And somebody came to me and said, "Hey, materials guy," I'd been on the job for like a month. "Hey, materials guy, how much recycled polyester are you guys using? You've been doing it now for 20 years. I gotta think you're near 100%. And I had a woefully unsatisfactory answer that was, "I actually don't know because we don't measure that today." And that kind of question, prompt, and insight led us to the first measurement of our fiber usage, which, gosh, you would think that everybody does this. It sounds easy. It's actually quite difficult. And our sobering moment then was that now 20 some odd years plus one later, because it took us a year to actually go do this, we realized that only 20 or so % of our polyester usage was recycled. For us, some of the things that keep me up at night are the things that our constituents, our consumers, our fans, our skeptics think we do already and think we do really well. And that was one moment where we said, gosh, we thought we were doing better than this. But taking that and turning it into a call for action. So from that came our first set of goals around 2025, because it was a nice, sweet, round number in the distant future, 10 years. And that was accelerate the adoption of preferred materials, try and get as close to 100% as possible. That was figure out packaging. That was scale our fair trade program and move towards living wage in the supply chain. That was something about chemistry. It ended up being PFAS, but we weren't quite there at the time. And now here we are, it's our fall 24 sales season, getting into 2025. 97% of our materials, by volume, by cost, however you want to slice it, are a preferred material with some level of certification. We've done things along the way, like take derelict fishing nets from Chile and Peru. And I wanted to tell the story, but I'm actually really cold, which is why I'm wearing this jacket. And turn them into high quality, 10 denier technical alpine climbing kit for our apparel line. Along the way, we learned that this work is hard, right? Back to the original prompt, it's complicated problems will require complicated solutions. They're not going to be sound bites. They're not going to happen quickly. They will take all of your time and energy to do, and they will be rewarding at the end. And I use this fishing net example all the time, one, because it's an example of everything that I just said. It was really hard. Every assumption we made at the beginning was wrong. And all we were trying to do was take a new feedstock and put it into an existing supply chain. And here we are. Kind of final point, Yvon Chouinard, our founder, he's the product person. He cares about product to its core. He walks around with his waders, his fishing waders on campus, and we say, oh God, they leaked. We're gonna have to have a talk about this. But when we launched our down sweater, which is our puffy down jacket, a couple years ago, we showed him the first prototype. It was in the Boreo Net Plus fishing net material, and he puts it on. And he's in his cottage in Jackson. They had run out of firewood, so they were freezing. I don't know why they didn't turn the heat on. But Yvon sat there and put the jacket on, zipped it up, and said, this is a perfect 10. And we never get perfect 10s from Yvon. He's our biggest critic. He said, it fits, it's functional. I can tell it's a down sweater from a mile away, so the design is there. I can also tell that you touched every single aspect of this, and it's still a down sweater. It's got the material, it's got the story, the whole thing. And we were like, sweet, we got one. And then in the same breath, he says, but when am I going to see it from another brand? So the kind of luxury and also pressure that we have is I could achieve through the work of my team, the work of the collective at Patagonia, all the different things that we write down on paper, and I could actually have achieved nothing at the same time. So this idea of collective action, the idea that fossil fuels are being burned on our behalf in far-off places that are backyards for the people who work there, that we share a supply chain with just about every other apparel company in this room listening or elsewhere out there, that we have the same waste profile as many of these folks, that our product line is not yet circular. I can give you a list, come find me later, of all the different things that we don't quite have figured out yet, is the reason that I'm excited to talk to all of you. So collective action is the answer.
So with 2025 literally around the corner, how are you thinking about the next 5 years, the next 10 years? How are you approaching that?
So 10 years can sound scary, and if you're a buyer, a materials person, if you're at a brand in the audience, who's got 10 years to spend doing this work? And what gets me excited is that what took us 10 should only take you 2 or 3, right? So I just walked through the hall out there. There are suppliers with scaled preferred materials. The collection books exist. Innovation plays a role in all of this, but solutions are available today. But it's just about taking action and moving forward.
And not everything has been figured out yet. There's still a lot of challenges in place, not least as, you raised, Liz, the sheer volume of production in the industry and the data gaps that remain, the things that we still don't know about where we're going. Liz, how do you look at this? Because you're talking to the people who are impacted every day, and change is very slow. And I know people in this room will feel that frustration, but they don't necessarily have to look in the eyes of the people who are impacted as they're feeling that. How do you keep pushing forward?
My team is how I keep pushing forward. I mean, I think that this question of hope comes up a lot. We were talking about it last night, and Sarah said very eloquently that, it's a puzzle. We don't always have all the answers, or whether or not you feel hopeful about finishing the puzzle doesn't really matter. And I think that really resonated with me because we don't really have a choice. It's in our backyards. Either you clean it up or you can't go to the beach, you can't fish. I think anyone who would visit the coastline in Accra, often when we give presentations, we begin them by asking people to close their eyes and imagine their favorite beach, and then to open their eyes and look at a visual of the beach in Accra. And we ask people, what would you do if this was the state of your favorite beach? And everyone says, I would start cleaning. I would demand change. So that's the choice that we have. For us, I think it's quite clear that we have to do something. We have to get up every day and take action. But the fact that my entire team is willing to put themselves on the front lines with our community and work hand in hand to make that happen, despite the fact that, our team is sick more often than they should be. It's difficult work to stare at a literal mountain of clothing and convince yourself that it's worth chipping away at. But I also think we're realistic, and we're operating on many different levels. We're removing 20 tons of textile waste from the beach on a weekly basis. Last week alone, we removed 58 tons of textile and plastic waste from one section of a beach. But then we're also working on policy, and we're looking at the root of the issue. Because I think as proud as we are of the impact we are making locally, we're not delusional enough to realize or to think that any of the solutions that we're developing, the new materials we're working on, the cleanups, the decomposition work that we're doing, the remediation work that we're doing, we understand that none of that will scale meaningfully if we don't tackle the root issue, which is this business model of overproduction and the lack of value in product. And I think, to give Patagonia a lot of credit, we found a couple Patagonia garments in the waste stream, not many. But the ones that we have found of Patagonia, there's people's initials on the tag. So someone took the time to write, their first, second, and third initial on the tag because they wanted that item back. And I think, we're in this room, a lot of brands are concerned about how do you convince the consumer to bring their clothing back as part of the circular economy. And I would say that if your consumer doesn't even care enough about looking for the item when they've lost it at the restaurant or at the campsite, maybe, for the Patagonia consumer, then of course they're not going to bring it back to your store. So does your customer care enough to put their initials in their clothes? Do they love that item? Then that's the beginning of the circular economy.
One of the things I thought was staggering that you said, Liz, was that when you started doing this work in 2011, so that's less than 15 years ago, the beaches were clear. So it's not a very long amount of time for things to have got much, much worse. And in that same time, Matt, as you mentioned, there's been some progress, there's more opportunities, but it took you guys a decade to start to shift to better materials, and there's, I know, still work going on to continue to improve that. And we're running out of time to make these changes. And we seem to be working in a world that is becoming increasingly complex and challenging. There's economic headwinds, there's geopolitical headwinds that everyone is dealing with. Matt, I'm going to start with you because I just went to Liz, but when you look ahead, what do you see as the key levers to move the needle now? Where do you see the opportunities, not just for Patagonia, but to bring together this collaboration you've been talking about?
Sounds pretty bleak, Sarah. So part of my job is that I have to live in the gnarly reality of the present supply chain and all of the impacts and pollution, people included, that are happening every day. And part of my job is that I have to live in the future. So I get to see the bright future that is some of the folks who are in this room working on how to recycle just about anything that gets back to us, folks working on policy for infrastructure, folks working on collection and sorting, and how the heck do we actually do that with actually a reasonably complicated product that we're trying to get back. As far as the pragmatic side of it, our fossil supply chain, which is the same as anybody who makes apparel, how on earth do we then identify big reduction opportunities, incentivize textile mill owners and partners with whom we're only 1, 2, or 3% of their overall business to do something really challenging that will be more expensive, that will have higher OpEx in the long run, but will be incredibly impactful. So fuel switching at a textile mill, for example. If you're able to do a fossil conversion, coal to gas, you get roughly a 50% reduction in greenhouse gas emissions, immediate air quality improvements in those local communities, and that's not a perfect place to start. But if you get to electrification with a renewable electricity future, if you're able to put all the pieces together, immensely impactful to those communities, and durably so.
And how do you do that? Because I remember hearing your CEO, Ryan Gellert, speak, I think, last year at Climate Week in New York, and he was talking about the issue of trying to decarbonize the supply chain, and specifically coal-fired boilers, and how do you switch away from coal-fired boilers? And he mentioned visiting, I think it was a factory in Taiwan, and they had an entire warehouse full of coal because that's what they needed to feed the boilers, and there wasn't a perfect way to switch. It was expensive. Gas, obviously, if you switch to it, it's still a fossil fuel. Biomass as an alternative is, also controversial, and electric boilers, expensive, not necessarily as efficient, and the grid, depending on what it runs on, not a great solution.
So I have license to be the first mover, and I have license to explore, do the difficult, do the expensive at first, do the hard part, always with the intent that when I talk to another brand who's in that textile mill, most of it's already figured out. So for us, we say this literally every day back in Ventura up the road, don't let perfect get in the way of progress. We know that the perfect solution isn't out there today, maybe too expensive, may not be accessible, may not have been invented yet. But with that North Star in mind, what are the steps that we can take today, both either in action in the center of the bullseye, in influence, one circle out, or kind of happily watching or distracted? How can I get to those first two circles and use the resources that I have and my team has, the influence that Patagonia has, however small we are in the grand sea of the apparel industry, to move the thing forward? So the real answer is we're looking for progress, but we're also looking for proof, and generally proof that we can show through product. So whether that's the supply chain that the product was created through, whether that's the product itself, back to the fishing net thing, that's the task that we have. And it's, in scientific terms, I'm an engineer, it's activation energy. So it's putting in a disproportionate amount of my team's time, our energy, resources, funding, all of that to figure it out and work the problem and then plan the work and then hopefully find some other folks who want to do the work with us.
And to take Liz's point, but to flip it a little bit, in an industry where products are sold for less than a cup of coffee, and I know that's not the case with Patagonia products, how do you galvanize partners to work on this, and how do you persuade people operating in the supply chain who are under immense pricing pressure to make these kind of long-term investments when they're being asked to take on a lot of short-term risk with no long-term guarantees?
Yeah, and it's the other complicating factor is that most of this is voluntary work, right? In a world where regulation, legislation, policy hasn't quite caught up yet, and we're not necessarily being compelled to do this, what that means is that it's always going to be a willing few who I need to go find to do the work with, who are happy being uncomfortable, who are happy not having the answers, who are happy making the disproportionate investment alongside us and the team that I have to go prove that it can be done. And I think the other thing I'll say is that I'd much rather always call somebody in than call them out. We've talked to just about every brand out there about all these things that we share, these problems that we have. And every time we get under the hood, we find a willing person or group of people who are just as smart or smarter, who are asking the same or better questions and want to see progress towards these things. And me getting to them and figuring out what partnership looks like is the hardest part, but the most impactful part.
I think it's interesting that you raised policy, because this, policy and regulation, I think, has been a really big driver of engagement and action over the last few years, and particularly in Europe, there's a lot of new regulations that are coming into force over the next few years. And California just introduced or just passed an extended producer responsibility bill. And Liz, you mentioned you've been engaging a lot on policy. How are you seeing those conversations play out? What role do you see policy as having?
I mean, policy is absolutely necessary. We have to change the rules of the game, and I think a lot of us are jumping through a lot of hoops again to figure out how to set a floor price for clothing. And policy is ultimately the mechanism that is going to do that. And so, I mean, we're working most closely on extended producer responsibility policies. And I'm sure all of you are aware, the only active policy is in France. And for us, the policy in France is flawed on a few different points. So one is that brands are only paying around 1 penny per garment. Soon it will be more. That's not enough to cover the true cost of waste management and catalyzing a circular economy. But two, 80% of the clothing that is collected in France is exported mostly to the continent of Africa, but all of the money that brands pay stays in France, which to us feels very counterproductive, because if the actual waste management work and the circular economy work is happening in countries like Ghana, then some of the resources that have been dedicated to that should also move with the clothing to support communities like Contamonto and to build new infrastructure. But also the eco-modulation of those fees doesn't make a lot of sense. For us, it should include production volumes as a form of eco-modulation, so brands that are oversupplying the market to us are inherently unsustainable and inherently building in waste into their business model, and therefore should be charged a higher fee. What I would say is when we're engaging at the EU level, here in the United States as well, you really have to show up. Like, you show up every single week, right? You show up with data. You have to write the actual sentences that you want to see in the policy. It is, again, to Matt's point, it's difficult work that's going to take a very long time. It's getting into the weeds and getting into the nuance of it. And for communities like ours, that's difficult, because these policy forums often are not making space for representation from across the value chain, and certainly not thinking about structural barriers for participation, like translation and language, or even the use of the term circular economy maybe is not something that our community understands when it's work that they do themselves every single day. Let alone the fact that for someone to participate in a policy forum in Europe, they have to get a visa, and they have to go through a bunch of bureaucratic hoops to show up. And so I think that we need to make sure that when we're developing these policies that we're actually talking to everyone along the value chain, and that it's not just a ticking of the box kind of exercise, but actually inviting people physically to come and participate and explain the nuance of what they do, and that's how we're going to end up getting these policies correct.
I feel like you want to jump in there, Matt. I saw you kind of...
Oh, no, I love it. I think part of it is you kind of got to scare people first. You know, like you said, when you go to a textile mill, the first thing you walk past is the warehouse full of God knows what that they're going to burn today to make heat for your processing of your textiles. That the very sobering reality of even the best suppliers out there, you know, are not kind of shiny white walls, stainless steel floors, perfectly clean, and everything else. And I think like that is the reality of what we're working in. Back to the one kind of side of my job that has me being a bummer to hang out with over coffee chats. But I think part of it is, how do we contextualize for the people who may never go visit Ghana or may never come with me and my team to a textile mill, of the sobering reality of what we're doing, and that should lead to progress. I think, though, the data thing is a really good point to bring up, and just a couple thoughts there. I'm kind of tired of companies hiding behind 100-page shiny ESG reports that leave out most of the bad stuff and leave in only the good stuff. Hasn't led to progress or accountability or any of that. Nice, I got one. I am tired of those constantly haranguing the data itself. No, it's not perfect. Yes, you can use it to make better decisions today. Yes, we should be using data to make decisions today while investing in improving the quality of our data. And kind of last point on data, and then I'll shut up. Collecting and publishing data doesn't actually mean anything. Data should lead to an insight, and an insight should lead to your next action, which is better informed than the one you did before. And if we reframe our approach around data like I just described, imagine what we could go do next.
So big fan of the incoming EU disclosure regulations.
Such a
You can
fan.
tell. I think one of the interesting things about the policy conversation that you kind of raised, Liz, and I think applies more broadly, is that what we're talking about is a really big structural, big picture issue, and often policies are conceived at a national level, or in EU case, at least at an EU level, but we're talking about something that has global impact, and climate change and all of the associated environmental impacts don't really know borders. And this goes to the point about collaboration. Matt, when you're trying to build your coalitions of the willing, how are you looking at bringing in people who just don't normally speak to each other across the value chain?
Yeah, and this is just actually a great way to approach innovation in general. And innovation is one of those words that might not mean much these days. It's a fancy word for problem solving, and I get to do it for work, which is fun. But really, innovation starts with asking great questions. And back to the fishing net thing, the idea to invest in this company and do this project came from a clerk on our legal team who had gotten it emailed to her from her nephew and thought it was cool. Like, great ideas truly come from everywhere, regardless of what your title is, what your role in the organization is, any of that. And when it comes to the question that you asked, which is who and how do you do this work, I always like to include a wild card. Somebody from a different department, somebody who I know thinks really well in ambiguous conversations, somebody who's keen and wants to participate. So like, a good goal is aspirational, so it's really hard. It's inspirational, so people want to find a time and find a way to spend their time working on it. And most importantly, it leads to progress towards an outcome. So if you kind of build your network of those people who will ask different, more provocative questions than you might, knowing what you do, or are wired to leave their preconceived notions at the door and have the best conversation of their whole life, regardless of whether it has anything to do with their job or not. That's how we do it.
Well, Liz, how do you get people to engage? How do you get them to think about what you're doing? People who don't think about this normally.
It's very difficult. I would say, most people, before they will take action, with the work that we do, I think there's so many misconceptions around the secondhand value chain that often when you've explained it to someone who's new to it, it's like you've slapped them across the face 5 times, and then you're like, would you like to help? And they're like, oh, I thought I was helping. So there's this dizziness to it, and this phase of denial that we've been through also with brands. I would say I have seen an improvement engaging with brands where 7 years ago when we would speak to companies, they would say that it's not their fault, that it's the consumer's fault because the consumer decided to donate the item or put it in the bin. But now no brand will pass off the responsibility onto the consumer, and brands are taking that responsibility on themselves and recognizing that if they're serious about building a circular economy, that they need to take some accountability for the post-consumer phase of their product. And so that's progress. But I would say it's difficult because I think so many people, in our case, don't take action until they see it for themselves, to the point where we've almost become a tourist agency as an NGO, and that is not our main mission or objective, but we have around 5 visitors every single week, people who want to come and experience the waste themselves and then maybe consider taking action on it. And so that concerns me, because I think that we need to have a little bit more imagination than that, because again, the problem is here. It's in closets here. You don't have to go all the way to Ghana to recognize that there's too much clothing or that there is a waste crisis, right? So we need to figure out in our local areas, how do we get in touch? How do we tether ourselves to a little bit of that reality to feel the same motivation that myself and my team feels every day by walking outside and seeing the problem in our backyard? Because it's in our backyard here as well. It's just hidden in tidy little logistical units that are flying across your face every day so you don't notice. But you need to get creative and you need to have some imagination. You need to notice it here and you need to act faster.
I want to throw that to you, Matt, because Patagonia thinks about this a lot. It thinks about how to talk to its customers a lot and how to engage them with the brand. It's also had a resale program for, I can't remember how long, but a long time compared to most companies. But that resale program is about 1% of the company's total revenue. So how, if you think about structural change and changing the paradigm, how do you start to move people to thinking more about using clothes for longer, buying secondhand, not sending things to waste?
It really starts with stopping shaming the consumer for the behavior we've trained them to do since the beginning of time through marketing and sales. Brands, to Liz's point, need to take responsibility for the pollution that's happening on our behalf and the mess that they're leaving at the end of the day. Full stop. It's not the consumer's fault. We should make it as easy as possible for the consumer to enjoy their product, to get their hands on it, to repair it, to resell it, without having the burden of, where do I put this? Where do I take it next? Do I have to do anything else as a consumer to do the right thing? Like that's our job, is to make it as easy as possible for them to participate and do the right thing. When it comes to what do we think about consumption, so we're a for-profit company, we have modest growth targets, we're owned by a nonprofit, we have a charity too, that's all good. So we have this kind of skirmish all the time back at home, and we always come back to our principles, our design principles. And what I'm about to describe is not circularity, it's nothing close to a circular economy, but maybe it's a good place to start. And that's maximize the time in the wild of our product. That's make it durable, make it functional, make it repairable, either in the field at one of our stores or ship it back and we'll fix it for you. Make it resellable with an asterisk, because 8 years in, we're still figuring that out, and there's a bunch of really smart people working on it. And then at the end of the day, ensure that for the sunk cost to the planet of creating this thing, whatever it is, that we can extract that value and amortize that over as many useful lives as possible. And that's an extended linear supply chain. That's not a circular one. We're working on the hard part, of course. One thing Liz said that just really stuck out for me as somebody who, has lived through superstorms on the East Coast and had to evacuate from my house because of what was the largest wildfire at the time in California, is that we actually don't have a choice not to be impacted by this stuff. We spend a lot of time thinking about the supply chain and all of that, but I didn't have a choice to leave my house that night because it may have burned down. And what happened in Florida a couple weeks ago, what happened in Europe last summer with the flooding, we are fully in the effects of climate change. And for us, everybody in this room and everybody else, saving the planet, it's in my mission statement, but it's not competitive. It's not a competitive thing. We need everybody possible to participate and to do this work. So please come join us.
We have 2 minutes left, but I want to follow up on that by asking a little bit about money, because that is a huge challenge here. Where the money to do this comes from, and how you persuade businesses to invest in something that's not going to generate immediate returns, notwithstanding the very real risks. And Matt, I wanted to start by asking you this. The industry is facing a very uncertain economic outlook. Patagonia too. Are you seeing companies you engage with pull back from looking at these issues? Are you worried about where we go from here in this economic climate? How do you keep momentum going?
Yeah, and the question I asked you at coffee this morning was, when's a commitment not a commitment? And that's when it gets really hard and you can quit. And we're seeing all kinds of retreating from lofty goals people put out. We're seeing people adopt fewer preferred materials or go back to, their virgin synthetic counterparts. But what gives me hope, back to the question that you asked Liz earlier, is that there are also big companies staying the course. right? And even if they're not doing it because it's the right thing to do and it's good for people and planet, they're doing it because of supply chain resilience, climate risk, and because all of that wraps up into their financial statement, and that's a good thing.
So do it for cynical reasons, but do it.
Skeptical maybe, but...
And Liz, we were talking last week about how plenty of collectors and sources in Europe are now panicking because they're seeing their business case for continuing to exist fall apart for the same reasons that you've been talking about Cantamanto coming under pressure. The value of the stuff coming back to them is falling, and they just can't make the margins they used to. At a time when Europe has said they want to make this work, they're putting policies in place to make it work, and the business model isn't operating. How do you see this playing out for Cantamanto and elsewhere?
I mean, the targets do not match the stated ambitions, right? So, I mean, the target in France is to keep only 15% of French clothing in France by 2027. In the Netherlands, the target is to keep 15% of clothing in the Netherlands by 2030. So, we have to be honest. We have to be honest about the fact that we are relying on other countries to manage our waste and build policies that account for this legacy. We all know the future we want to get to. We all know that we want to get to the circular economy or whatever your preferred term is for that, but we're not there yet. And we have 20 years worth of material, of legacy material, that we have to figure out how to process and how to build regulation around. And what I'm seeing is that there's not accountability for that legacy. It's all future forward. And that's where there's this dissonance. So, I mean, for me, with Cantamanto, in terms of what the exporters are experiencing, I'm not surprised, right? I mean, what they're experiencing is just a sliver of what Cantamanto has been experiencing for the last decade. And the reality is Europe does not have the ability to manage its own waste. The prediction is that Europe would need 150 recycling plants to manage its own waste. That's not going to happen overnight. So again, we need to get realistic, and we need to make sure that the communities that are inevitably going to carry the burden of this are well cared for and supported while we work on the transition. We aren't perfect. We don't have it under control. We have to get comfortable saying that we aren't there yet, right? But how are we taking care of the people who, again, have been impacted and are going to continue to be impacted by the lack of action for the last 20 plus years?
We are unfortunately at time, but I think there is a very clear case for change. The impacts are here. They're happening. They're going to affect everyone. They're going to affect everyone's businesses. And they're all ways forward, even if they're challenging. So Liz, Matt, thank you so much. And Whitney is just going to come back with a few notes before coffee.
Well, thank you so much to our panelists. I feel like this is such a great way to start by really grounding us in what the stakes are here of what we're talking about. I'm so struck by that anecdote Liz shared about finding Patagonia on the beach and it having someone's initials in it, and thinking about what does it mean for us to think about as an industry creating the kinds of clothing that actually has the value that people want to hold on to and will actually put work into repairing and put work into getting back. I think when it can be really easy when we're on like a big shiny stage and we've flown from all over and we're staying in nice hotels to get a little bit disconnected from what the stakes of this are. And I think I've learned so much from Liz over the years. I've been covering the Aura Foundation's work for a long time, that this is life or death work. This is life or death work. And you might not feel that in your day-to-day, or maybe you do, but there are communities that are. And so I really want us to hold that, not to like make it a bummer or to be a downer, but to really understand that the stakes of what we're talking about here are really serious, and that there's a responsibility that comes with that, but there's also an opportunity to really be part of the solution to sort of move this industry in a better direction. The other thing that's sort of coming up as I'm hearing from these panelists is that so many of the things that they're talking about are things that we have panels or breakout sessions on. So if you're interested in thinking about growth or thinking about the data gaps that exist or thinking about legislation, there are panels or breakout sessions on almost all of those things. So please take a look at the agenda and make sure that you're sort of heading to the right place, because there's lots of ways to dig deeper into this conversation. So from here, we're going to go into a break until 11:45. You can head over to the exhibit hall, catch up with people, do some networking, grab some coffee, and then at 11:45, we'll head out into the breakout sessions. And you can take a look at what some of those are in the app, again, covering legislation, covering data, covering preferred materials. From there, we'll go into lunch. There are a few things you can head to during lunch as well, or you can just do your own thing, but take a look in the app to sort of see. There are going to be spotlight sessions with material producers and designers you can hear a little bit more from during lunch if you'd like. And then we will reconvene here for the closing plenary at the end of the day. So enjoy the networking and the breakouts, and we'll see you soon.